Now, the parts of the world are going one of two ways. There's one of two ways you can deal with this growing water crisis. You can either go the path where you say, okay, we have diminishing water sources and increased demand. We are going to collectively come together, protect this water. We're going to call it a commons. We're going to name it a commons. We're going to consider it a public trust that belongs to everyone, does not belong to anyone. And if you're going to use more than a certain amount per day, you're going to have to be licensed for it, a proper licensing process, not like the one that exists here. But it's going to be, allocation is going to be based on a set of priorities that we set. And we are going to consider this water also important to the ecosystem, and we are going to have a water plan or a water budget. We are going to make collective decisions about how to use it. The best example that I have of this is the state of Vermont in New England, which had an awful lot of bottled water companies coming in and just helping themselves to their water because they had no protections. And they brought in legislation 4 years ago to say that no one owns the groundwater in Vermont. It belongs to the people of Vermont. It belongs to the future as much as it belongs to the present. And it belongs to the ecosystem, and they named that very clearly. They also said, and they set up a licensing system for anyone using it commercially, which they're charging for, but not charging for ordinary use by people for their ordinary daily use of water. And they said if there's ever a shortage or any kind of crisis, then we'll kick in the priority of water, equitable water access for all, sustainable local food production, which is very different than water for massive export by a handful of small companies like the ones you saw in Australia, and water for ecosystem protection. And this is incredibly important because what we're learning is when we take water out of ecosystems, the ecosystem, the watershed starts to dry up. I have a scientist friend who says, look, I'm going to make it simple for you. He takes a sheet of clear sheet of plastic that's yellow, and he said that's the sun, and he takes clear sheet of blue, and he says this is water, and we put them together and they turn green, and that's how you get vegetation. He says if you remove the water from the equation, the sun hits the soil, and you cannot grow the vegetation. You will not, and then the rains will go away, because if you cannot capture the rain through vegetation, through the green stuff that holds that water and holds it in the soil dries up, it blows away, and you create desert. And we are creating massive deserts in more than 100 countries in the world. Desertification of our planet is taking place really, really quickly. So you have to protect ecosystems. You have to leave enough water in, and if you don't have enough water, you have to set out to restore that water in those ecosystems. This is absolutely crucial. So that's one direction you can go in. The other direction you can go in is to say, let us leave it wide open to the market. We'll put our water on the open market for sale, like running shoes, like Coca-Cola, and we will allow the market to set the rules. Now, what you should know, and I think it's really important to say about Australia, is that it happened there incrementally. What we're hearing from the government here in Alberta is, oh, we're not talking about a wide open market, we're talking about an incremental process. That's what they said in Australia. First it was just going to be farmer-to-farmer sales or transfers, then it was farmers to cities, and now of course these big banks are getting involved, the big investors are coming in, the big foreign investors are coming in. They're not only buying up water, but they're then turning around and setting up their own export commodity industry. So almonds is the big thing. Macquarie Bank has set up Macquarie agribusiness, and they're in the almond business, the almond export business, so they're cornering the market in one area of the Murray-Darling to get this water to produce the crops that they know that they can sell for money. So it really did happen incrementally there, and I think it's very important for you to know that when you start this process, it's very, very hard to stop it. As Scott said, this has happened fairly recently. 1999 was the Water Act, and now there's a revision, a process to revise and look at this process. And you should know that, excuse me, well, you probably do know that most of the licenses, the granting of licenses is stopped in most of southern Alberta. So suddenly, those who have licenses for this water have come into a windfall. And remember, most of these licensees never paid a cent for them. All of a sudden, they're worth a great deal of money. And by the way, something else that, excuse me, that I wanted to mention from Australia is that the price of water, because once the government got back into the game trying to buy back these water rights, the price of water went up from about $2 a megaliter to around $2,400 a megaliter in 1 decade. So you got to stop and try to think what this is going to mean for ordinary people, for small farmers, for small communities, for anybody who isn't able to compete in that way. Our concerns then basically are the following, and it's important to note that only 5% of licensees hold rights to 90% of Southern Alberta's allocated water. So we already have a situation where there is not only coming speculation, but real monopolies, real power being held by a small group of agribusiness companies, energy companies, and some municipalities. The major concerns are, first of all, that water markets fail to provide for the environment. They fail to keep water safe for the ecosystem. The ecosystem, nature, has to compete against other uses of this water. And as you heard from the description of where the province is going, they see economic development as being an indicator of what should happen. Exactly what China did. About 20 years ago, the Chinese government did a study, and they figured they could make 60 times more money from a drop of water if it was used in the production of goods that they then ship overseas, like toys, running shoes, whatever, rubber duckies, whatever, than if they left it in the ground or if they used it to grow food. So they've massively transferred their water, because they had solely an economic notion about it, to the production of this massive export industry that they have. And there are now 4,000 cities that may have to be moved because the desert is encroaching. As they have sucked up that water, not left it in the ground, they have destroyed lives and livelihoods of literally billions or millions and millions of people. So it's very important for us to understand the need to place ecosystem protection as a priority, but this water markets don't do that. Water markets also do not protect municipalities, they do not protect the public, they do not protect the set of values that say that we want to make sure that there's equitable access to this water for human needs as well as ecosystem preservation. In other words, the government is abdicating its responsibility to have a role in decisions around this, allowing instead the decisions to be made by those with the ability to pay. Even public bodies such as municipalities will have to compete for this water, and this is going to drive the price of water up for ordinary people in this province. And you should know that high water prices are not just in the global south. A few years ago, they turned off the water, literally turned the water taps off to 42,000 people in Detroit, Michigan, because they couldn't pay their water bills. Most of them are African American, older people, single mothers, and so on. We're also very concerned that this process is going to lock in the process that was really the sins of the past. When Alberta set up its water access, it was the notion of first in time, first in right, which has allowed it to be so skewed by a few very powerful interests. That would be locked in. Those powerful interests that came into this process, getting these licenses for nothing, now finding that they hold these licenses that will be worth a great deal of money, will have even more power than they had in the past. So, and it's very important to know that in many cases, certainly this is true in Alberta, you have water rights for water that no longer exists. A new study in Alberta found that Australia found that a third of the water that the government had so-called bought back doesn't exist. So they only have 2/3 of what they paid for to actually physically put back into the Murray-Darling. So a small group of large corporations will have huge control over water supplies. This will promote speculation, and small interests will be muscled out. We're also very, very concerned about the trade dimension. As it is, under the North American Free Trade Agreement, if Alberta were to move to the energy companies operating, for instance, in the tar sands, we want to cut back your water access by a half. We're drowning here, or the opposite, we're in drought here. You can't do this to our water anymore. All the companies, Canadian and American, would have to abide by it, but the American corporations under Chapter 11 of NAFTA would have the right to sue for financial compensation. We have a legal opinion to this effect. They could sue for up to billions of dollars, says a group of legal scholars at York University. There's a very bad precedent in this direction recently. There's a company called Abitibi-Bowater, and Abitibi-Bowater ran a pulp and paper mill, a bunch of them, in Newfoundland 2 years. It's an American company. 2 years ago they pulled out, and then they said, well, we want compensation for our water and timber that we left behind. And Danny Williams, never one to hold back his opinion, said, that's not your damn water and timber, that's our damn water and timber, and you go away. You know, you could access it when you were making jobs here, but you're not doing that. So they sued the government, but it had to be the Canadian government, because Canada signed NAFTA, for compensation, and the Canadian government 2 weeks ago gave them $130 million. An American company that left Newfoundland and left all those jobs in the lurch gave them money for water rights that they abandoned behind them, that they never had. It's a very bad precedent, because now we have, in an agreement and a payment, on record, a precedent of our government saying any company, that would mean any American grain company, agribusiness company, energy company, mining company operating here would have the right to claim for those water rights if they take up and pick up and take off, or if they just are told they have to stop destroying water.